Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL wire site that covers Arizona Cardinals. After a week off, like the Cardinals had, it's Seth Cox with me from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, Arizona Cardinals site from SB Nation, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. Guess what? It's that time, guys. If you haven't subscribed to the show, you need to get on that right now. It's been a kind of a crazy schedule for his co-host Justin Higdon, but they will be especially we're going to be talking about draft stuff, right, Seth? We're in episode 494. Here we're gonna hit episode 500 before season's end, Seth, and that's pretty exciting. But we don't have a game to talk about, but we do have a lot of fun stuff to talk about because it was a really good weekend for the Cardinals, even though they didn't play a game, right?
Yeah, it was exactly what we were hoping for. Obviously, the only other team that could technically leapfrog the Cardinals with a win was also on a bye. So, it was great to see that all these teams that we were like, who would have thought that five teams that the Cardinals needed to win would win games? That's kind of unheard of, right?
That was insane. It was crazy. There were, what was it? Four or five 4-win teams. And I wrote a piece bye week content because the Cardinals were on their bye. They had all of last week off. But they were sitting at the third pick, tied with the Patriots with 3-10. But the Patriots get the higher pick because they have the weaker strength of schedule. Then there were a whole bunch of 4-win teams, and I wrote how, hey, the Cardinals aren't been playing with some things that will really help them for draft status. And for the record, you guys know that I'm not a big draft status guy. I'm like, let the Cardinals win games, but if they're going to be bad, you might as well have, if they're going to lose games, you might as well have scenarios where they benefit the Cardinals. And so you had all these teams that just had one more win than they did, and they were playing heavy favorites. And, if they won games, every one of those 4-win teams that won just gives the Cardinals an extra cushion because, they might win a game or two, but with a 2-game cushion with 4 games left in the season, it means the Cardinals can even F around a little bit, win a game, at least like a game, and don't have to lose out to stay their draft status, and so they can take progress and not risk missing out on, Cardinals fans would say Marvin Harrison Jr., because they currently sit at the third spot. That would be kind of like everyone is talking about Will Anderson last offseason. Everyone has their eyes on Marvin Harrison Jr., but, let's kind of go. This was a weird weekend. It was a weird upset week. I think they were 8 underdog teams that won outright. That's absurd, one, from a betting perspective, but it was so good because you had the Jets winning to pick up their 5th win, but their win also helped the Cardinals with the Texans because it knocked the Texans out of the playoff pictures temporarily. So that Texans pick goes from 18 to 16. The Jets pick up win number 5. The Bears beat the Lions. And now we know that the Bears are going to have the Panthers pick, which is almost locked in at number 1, but the Bears themselves also picked up their 5th win. Then you had the Titans and the Giants on Monday night pull off improbable wins over the Packers and the Dolphins. Both of them pick up their 5th win of the season. And so all that you have left in terms of you've got the Cardinals and the Patriots with 3 wins each, only the Washington Commanders are the ones threatening to overtake the Cardinals. Say if the Cardinals were to win against San Francisco and Washington were to lose to the Rams, they would move ahead of the Cardinals through their, weaker strength of schedule. But this basically locks in the Cardinals to top 4 pick, right? You almost don't have to worry about dropping out of the top 4, which the way the Cardinals schedule goes, because of strength of schedule, if they are tied with the team at the end of the year, they will have the last pick of that group of teams. Like if they had 5 wins right now, like the Bears, Raiders, Jets, Giants, Titans, and Chargers, they would be the one picking 10th because their strength of schedule is .557. They've faced their teams are above 500. Their opponents. Everyone else is below that. And so they would be, if they were in the same scenario, they would be the 10th pick. But now, this is kind of fun because now only the Commanders are in their way. And so even if the Cardinals win one and the Commanders don't win again, they would still sit at number 4, which, 3 would be better. But 4's not a bad place.
No, 4 is not a bad place. I mean, it becomes a interesting conundrum with what the Washington Commander skins are going to do there. But it does allow you to potentially move down if they end up taking, Marvin Harrison Jr. or taking the best tackle in a really good draft of tackles or taking the next wide receiver who's also incredibly good. So, you have some options there. Obviously 3 is kind of the catbird seat, if you will, with it looking like Caleb Williams and the newly declared Drake May will be the first 2 picks of the NFL draft. And so when you look at it from that perspective, 3 is where you want to be. 1, because you kind of control the rest of the draft, right? Now, the Bears are in an interesting position with how well they're playing at times that maybe, they will move on or maybe they won't move on from.
But that'll just mean that they trade out.
Yeah, but that just limits your choices. That's all it does, really.
Yeah.
Right? It just limits.
If ultimately they trade out, then it's still going to be quarterback 1, 2, and the Cardinals are sitting pretty.
Yeah, unless they're crazy. And not that I've said before, I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best player in the draft. But if you don't take Caleb Williams or Drake May, whoever you think is the best quarterback, and you end up taking Marvin Harrison Jr., I just don't see, unless he becomes a Tyreek Hill level impact player, because, I mean, we've seen what Tyreek Hill does when he's on the field for the Miami Dolphins. Unless you see that, like, I just don't know if not trading that pick does it. And it's, similar for the Cardinals. That's what you have to look at. They just lack, the Cardinals lack an alpha receiver right now. Hopefully, it sounds like Michael Wilson is probably finally going to be back this week, but they just lack that alpha receiver. So they making that pick at 3 makes a lot of sense. Obviously, you have the historical aspect of Larry Fitzgerald, now Marvin Harrison Jr. But again, if the Bears shock the world and take Marvin Harrison Jr., then you're in the catbird seat again, right? Because now all of a sudden one of those teams,
2 quarterbacks is available,
yep. And so you
can get a whole bunch. Monty can win the draft again, like last year.
Right. And you look at it, and I mean, obviously, we're not going to talk too much about mock draft stuff here, but if you just look at the consensus mock draft and where guys are going and things like that, if you trade down to, like, let's say the Giants, I know Tommy DeVito's all the rage right now, and so clearly they're not going to move on from touchdown Tommy DeVito. But if they decided to move on from Tommy DeVito and you go from 3 to 8, right, and you probably pick up probably similar to what you got last year, they're 1-2 this year and a 1 next year, and then I think the Cardinals also got a 3, correct?
Yes, they did.
Yeah, and so if you do, if you end up with something similar to that, and then you're sitting at 8 and you have your choice. I mean, you got J.C. Latham, the fantastic right tackle from Alabama. You've got Brock Bowers, one of the best tight ends. You've got Jerzon Newton, and you've got Dallas Turner. I mean, those are the next 4 picks from 8 to 11. Every single one of those players is a fit in what the Cardinals need. So,
for sure.
So you look at it like Jess said, you win the draft again, right? You come out of here and you've got a 1 and a 2 this year. You've got a 1 and a 3 next year, and you're like, this ain't half bad, right? And so that's obviously down the road, but something to look forward to, because there are just so many scenarios. But as soon as you get to 4, now things change just a titch, right? Just a little bit. But 4 is obviously not the worst spot to be, because nobody knows what's going to happen with the Commanders. They could go for a quarterback. Hell, I mean, Ron Rivera is gone. They have a new owner. Will you have a new GM if you move on from Ron? I'm assuming, right? Like, you're going to keep Martin Mayhew even longer. I don't know, man. So,
let's look at the schedule. So, we'll talk about the Cardinals in the next segment, but let's kind of look at the schedules left. How many wins that we think each of these teams behind them likely goes. But let's first talk. Let's look at the Texans, because that's just a different story. That's not has to do with the top of the draft. That has to do with that second pick. Right now, the Texans are 7-6. C.J. Stroud, concussion protocol. Tank Dell's done for the year. Nico Collins is hurt. So we'll see. Like, they play their next 4 games. They play the Titans twice. A Titans team that is interesting this year. They play the Browns at home, and then they end with the Colts on the road. All 4 of those games, definitely winnable games. So you could see them going 11-6. But going 2-2 probably is. Do you think they win more than two of those final 4 games? Because an ideal situation for the Cardinals. Now, I don't know if you can hope. You can hope that they go 0-4. They finish 7-10. But
I mean, that's what I'm hoping.
Right. But reasonable. You just don't want them making the playoffs, right? Because that team is a dangerous enough team where if the way that the draft order works is once the teams are in the playoffs, it's not just about record, it's about elimination and record. And so if they win a game, they're going to move into the 20s. If they win another game, they move into the late 20s. While if they don't make the playoffs, that they're going to be outside the top 19.
So right now they're obviously at 8, so they're just a game out of 7th place, which would put, which right now their division rival, the Indianapolis Colts, is in front of them. But so you mentioned it, obviously they take on the Titans twice. The Titans are sitting at 15th in the AFC, which is absurd to think with 5-8. But they're 15th, so second to last, or in last place in the AFC in the standings. Obviously, they just shocked everybody and beat the Miami Dolphins, and that's what makes this hard, right, Jess? Is that you get a game like that where you go,
that was their first road win of the year.
Yeah, you're like, oh yeah, this is easy call.
They were 13.5-point underdogs,
and they were down by 4 or 13 points with very little time left to go, and then they came back and won. So, you look at that at Tennessee, on the road this year.
So honestly, Cardinals fans, we are big Titans fans for 2 reasons. Because it keeps the Titans away from us, and they could potentially beat the Texans twice, which would give them, if they somehow could beat the Texans twice, that would give the Texans 8 losses, at least minimum.
Yeah, and so obviously then the Colts, we obviously they're They're going to play the Colts as well, so that's one to watch. But the big one to me is that Cleveland game. Cleveland's in the playoffs right now.
We can't forget that Joe Flacco is still elite, guys.
We
forgot about Joe Flacco's eliteness.
and they're in the playoffs right now, which is, I mean, their defense is phenomenal. So I don't want to take anything away from them. I mean, number one in yards, they're a little bit lower in points against, but number one in yards, and they just beat up on Jacksonville.
Oh my
of course,
gosh.
Before that, they lost back-to-back games to the Broncos and Rams. So again, we really have no idea what team this is or what to make of them. But that's the key game, because I think if they go 2-2, they'll probably not make the playoffs.
Correct.
And that's, like you said, whether it's sitting at with the what is it, the 19th pick, I think is the end of it. Or the 18th pick. So whether you're picking, whether you're sitting with the 18th pick or the, ideally maybe like the 15th or something like that, that would be ideal. Obviously, losing out is probable, especially with all the or is possible. I shouldn't say probable. It's possible, not as probable, but they have a lot of injury issues that's just kind of laid out there. Yeah. So then, like you said, the Titans are one to watch. They're 9th at 5-8. And you might be saying, well, why 5 wins? Well, something we'll talk about later on, but Jess and I feel like the Cardinals can win one more game. But after this weekend, you have to look at it and go, could they win 2 games?
Yeah,
because the
and
NFL
2 games, well, rooting for wins. We always root for wins. But we also don't want the draft to get messed up. So we need other teams to win just in case.
Right. Because if they win 2 games at this juncture and nobody else wins, and by the way, if Houston sweeps Tennessee, that's like a double whammy, right? Yeah. Like Houston sweeps Tennessee and then they end up and the Cardinals win too. Tennessee would pick in front of Arizona, and then Houston has a playoff berth. Like you're like, oh, come on, Tennessee, just win 1 game. So Tennessee's won. Then you mentioned it. You've got Chicago. Obviously, there's a head-to-head there. Chicago's at 5 wins as well. The
Cardinals can't afford to win that. They can't afford to win that game because there's the Buffalo already.
Well, and Chicago's got a tough road to hoe. They've got Cleveland this week in Cleveland, and then they have to go to Green Bay. Now the Cardinals is a coin flip, and then they play the Atlanta Falcons, and the Falcons are as much of a coin flip as any team in the NFL, right? Like, I mean, they're in. Are they? No, they're not in the playoffs.
They did a bump. They went from a division leader to out of the playoffs. Losing to the Bucs. So let's look at the Texans though. How many wins? I think they get 2 wins. I think they'll be out of the playoffs. I think that'll happen. I think they'll just fade down the stretch. I think 2 wins is what they'll get, and so that's how I think that'll go.
Yeah, I think 2, but with the injury concerns, I could see 1 creeping up. Yeah. Now, I don't want to jinx this, and then they go 3-1, and we're like, dang it. But I think you could potentially see 1 creeping in because of that. I'm not going to call for just 1. I think they end up at 9-8. And then it'll just be, who do they lose to? Did they lose to the Browns? Did they lose to the Colts? Like who did they lose to? So.
And I'm looking at the Titans. They have Texans at home, Seahawks at home, Texans on the road, Jaguars at home. I'm going to say they get 1 win. And so they will stay, like the Cardinals will avoid danger with the Titans because I think they'll win 1 game.
Yeah, I think so too. And then you look at, you've got the Chargers, which is a really bad situation all of a sudden, right? Like, obviously this week is the big one because the Chargers and the Raiders play each other. So one of those teams ideally has to win a game. I'm not going to say they will, but ideally
A tie would actually be bad.
Yeah, a tie would be awful for the Cardinals. But yeah, ideally one of those teams wins a game. And so you end up with one of those teams at 6 wins and then you're okay. But let's look, if you look at the rest of the Chargers schedule, if they don't win this week, it's going to be tough. You've got the Buffalo Bills, even though it's at home, you still have the Buffalo Bills at Denver and then against Kansas City. So this is really the only game left on the schedule where you're like, okay, they could win. On the flip side, you've got the Raiders, and they have the Chiefs and the Broncos as well, but they have the Colts. They have the Colts smushed in between there. So I think this weekend we're wanting Chargers.
Yes, Chargers. We want the Chargers to win this week, and we want the Raiders to win again later. We don't care.
The Colts. And then you've got the Giants and the Jets, and apparently the Giants are never going to lose again with Tommy DeVito quarterback. And their schedule.
Oh, they play the Saints.
Yeah, so they've got the Saints,
the Eagles twice, and the Rams. Now, the way the Eagles are playing, especially in the division, they could win one game. You know, and I think the Cardinals are sitting good because I think the Giants will get at least one win in their Final Four.
I would agree with that. And then you got the Jets. The Jets have the Dolphins, who I'm assuming are going to come back around and make things interesting. But then their next 3 games are infinitely winnable. You've got the Commanders, you've got the Browns, and then you've got the Patriots. So I feel like they can pick up 2 wins in those games and end up at 7 on the season.
Perfect. Well, and Aaron Rodgers is coming back, right?
All right. So then that leaves, that's everybody. The Chargers, the Titans, the Giants, the Jets, the Raiders, and then the Chicago Bears. Like we said, the Bears, the Bears this weekend it's tough. They got the Browns. But
Browns, Cardinals, Falcons, Packers.
You feel like they can beat the Falcons. You really do.
They could beat the Packers.
Yeah, the Packers
they could beat the Cardinals too. So
yes, but then we don't have anything to worry about. Right.
But that's also the part because we do want the Cardinals to win, right?
Yeah, it'd be great if they could pick up.
That's good for building. It's bad for the draft, but good for the team. Very complicated situation.
Now, let me ask you this. The team right behind them, so the next team that they're going to catch is the Commanders. The Commanders left have the Rams, the Jets, and then no prayer, the Niners and Cowboys. So ideally, they get a win out of the way as soon as possible, right? But looking at it, you would think that Jets game is the one to kind of watch, right? To kind of monitor, because that's like if they can't beat the Rams this weekend in LA, which is going to be tough with how the Rams have been playing.
The Rams are playing really well right now.
The Jets is their only shot, because that's the thing. I mean, and that's how we started it. We want this team to win. We would love for the Cardinals to ideally they go 4-0 and then we just, razz about the fact that they won 7 games this year. That's,
and but, that would, I called 7 wins, but that also, that would,
but if they
anything short of that, really,
right.
Draft
but if they end up winning 4 games and then the kick in the pants being that they lost to Washington head to head, but now pick 4th instead of 3rd. Like that's the hard part to swallow. So you really would like the Commander Skins to get one more win in them to give you that buffer. So Cardinals can get to 4 wins. And then if they end up winning 5, you just shrug your shoulders and you hope that, the Bears and the Raiders and the Jets and the Giants and the Titans and the Chargers all won one more game in these last 4. But, it's going to be a tough one, man. It's
the Patriots. Okay, let's potentially. Is there a possibility that the Patriots end up ahead of the Cardinals? Like, so say the Cardinals win one. Do you think the Pats could get 2 wins? I don't think I don't think there's a chance in hell. I think the Chiefs are going to come back and absolutely demolish the Pats. But they've got the Broncos, Bills, and Jets.
And that's where I'm at too. Like, so the Chiefs is tough. At Denver and at Buffalo is tough. If either one of those games were at home, I'd feel a little better. But at Denver, at Buffalo is tough. But the Jets on January 7th. The problem with that one is if the Cardinals have won a game, then it doesn't really matter to them, right?
Right.
And so that's where you kind of look at
Billy B. Good old Billy B is gonna.
Yeah, and the reports are out that he's done, which is crazy to think that, you know, one of the most successful coaches in NBA history is done. But, you know, it everything comes to an end, whether it's, you know, by age, by retirement, you know, God forbid, death, you know, everything comes to an end.
Yeah.
I just didn't expect it. I don't think either of us expected it to end like this, right?
No, with a terrible, awful team. Just he's walking, like, if that's ends up being it, he's leaving the game like so many players end up leaving because
they just hung on just
they
a
hung
little
on
bit
too
too long,
and then they don't get to go out on their terms. They're just like, okay, sorry, you're you know, that the best example of that, Brett Favre.
Right.
that final year was just bleh, bleh. Yeah. So, you know, it looks like the Cardinals are in an okay spot. That last weekend was fantastic. So things should play out. And maybe we can, as long as, like, if the Commanders can just win a game.
And that might be asking a lot for a team that, again, is probably moving on from their coach. That's the hardest thing is you look at this and, like, you look at, you know, just go into what we're talking about here. The Cardinals and the Bears, I'm looking who else. The Jets and the Raiders a little bit seem to be playing hard for the coach. I think the Titans have turned the corner a little bit with Will Levis, but you know, like New England, Carolina, obviously. I'm don't know what to make of the Giants. I'm curious on your opinion, and then the Chargers, they just don't seem like they care anymore. Like they're just kind of over this guy as their coach, and they're ready for a change. And so that's what makes it difficult, right? Because you know, if you're not playing for your coach, I mean, we saw it last year with Cliff, right? Like if you're not playing for your coach, if you're not playing for the playoffs, what incentive do you have to play hard when the reality is there's a lot of opportunities to just cash those checks for 4 more weeks, not get injured, and enjoy a long off season.
Yeah.
And that's not something we say is happening, but like it does appear.
It does happen. It comes up. So especially, it's not to say that any player goes into a game, you're like, no, what happens is they start losing and they don't have the juice to compete after getting punched in the mouth in a game.
Right, exactly. And that's where things just, you know, go sideways, and it's unfortunate. So we'll see how it turns out. Like you said, I think neither of us in our wildest dreams would have ever assumed it would happen with a Bill Belichick coach team.
No. Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about the Cardinals. How many more wins do we think they get? How many wins should they get? That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals have 4 games left. Obviously, we still root for the Cardinals to win. We kind of talked about it. Is it both where we think that it's one win and it's probably the Bears?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's tough. And so here's what I would say. I think the only game that you go in feeling and confident is probably way too strong of a word, but like feeling like this is a game that they should be able to compete in is the Bears game. Of course, we say that having been assured of ourselves that they were going to lose to the Steelers, and then they, kind of embarrass the Steelers, and then again, the Patriots followed suit, and so now you're like, well, the Steelers suck. Never mind. Jess and I were wrong. And by the way, Jess and I both thought the Steelers sucked going into that game. We were lauding Mike Tomlin's coaching ability because we're like, how's this team a freaking 7-4 team? They're awful. So it's just one of those situations that you look at and it's tough, man. And so you've got a team that in the Bears where you feel like that's the game you can compete in. After that, it gets dicey at best.
Like the 49ers, they are.
We're going to cover that game this weekend, and guess what Jess and I are going to do?
This is more about
Cardinals a chance.
Can they cover the 13.5 point spread?
Right. No, 100%. I'm with you, man. Like that's the question. It's not whether or not they're going to compete with this team because they're not there. I mean, be fair, the teams that are supposed to be competing, like I was talking about it the other day. Think about this, Jess. The 49ers are now the 1 seed in the NFC. The Cardinals are 2-2 in their last 4 games. And if you go back, 5 games, obviously they're 2-3 but 2-2 with Kyler. The 49ers in their last 5 games, they've beat the AFC South leading Jacksonville Jaguars 34-3. They've beat the NFC South leading Tampa Bay Buccaneers 27-14. They beat the then playoff team Seattle Seahawks 31-13. They beat the then 1 seed Philadelphia Eagles 42-19. And then they struggled this weekend and beat the Seahawks 28-16. So you're like, all right, 13.5. I'm actually like 13.5. I was like, that seems low to me. Like I would have, and I know it's a respect thing because it's at home.
Yeah.
But I would have been like 16.5. Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah.
That'll be the discussion is because they lost by 19 and didn't play like offensively. They didn't play badly, right, with Josh Dobbs, and lost by 19. Can they do it? But that's for another show.
So
the Bears game, I don't know that like you look and like. You want the Cardinals to win. I think you want them to win 1 game, right? Because you don't want after this 2-2 start to fizzle. I think as much as it would help with the draft, and should New England win a game, if the Cardinals were to lose out and end up at number 2, okay, that's really good. That's good, but the momentum that they've gotten with Kyler back in the lineup, I'd hate to see that fizzle out with an 0-4 end, which going 2-6 with Kyler, losing the last 4, feels immensely worse than 3-5 and win over and then the last 3 losses are against teams where you're not supposed to compete with.
Right. And I'm with you 100%. So you look at it, but here's the thing. I mean, ideally they win that game. We have to also be honest. Like it's a Sunday evening game.
It's
in Chicago on Christmas Eve. There's a lot of things going against them in that game itself. So you have to look at it from that perspective. Now we're still expecting them to compete.
Yeah.
We're still expecting them to play well. But at the end of the day, I think we're looking at a team that, has so many flaws that as long as they compete in that game, I think you're happy. If if they look like they did against the Rams, or the Browns, and obviously those teams are much better, but like if that's how they look, then you're again concerned, and the next topic becomes the topic we have to discuss, right? Because then you're set up. If you lose that game, you're expecting to go 3-14. You're expecting to be a 3-win team, coming off a season where you went 4-13. I don't think either of us would be shocked, to see them be a game worse by any means, especially with Kyler only playing half the season, but it would still be disappointing.
Yes. Just the momentum, because there is a little bit of momentum when you do that. So, and I was telling you this off the air before the show. If there's going to be a game that they win, and so if they lose the game against the Bears, I wouldn't be all that, like, I'd be shocked if they beat the 49ers.
I think everybody would, yeah.
The whole world. And honestly, I think that Week 18 game against the Seahawks is going to be very, very tough as well, because there's one thing we've seen from the Seahawks so far. They've really gotten really good defensively, and that didn't show against the 49ers because Brock Purdy is just carving people apart right now. Their skill players are too good now, but look at the way the Eagles are playing right now. They have, what was the stat? Like over the last 4 or 5 weeks, they have the worst defense in the league.
Right.
You have Gannon and Rollis going back into Philadelphia, where Gannon was made, like, and you look at it, and our guys over PHNX have asked this question, but Gannon was the problem, right? Gannon was the problem. He was doing what he did with all the talent when they still got all that talent, maybe even more, and doing worse right now. And if the offense is humming a little bit, especially with that run game, I can see a scenario where the Cardinals go in and beat the Eagles. That'd be the weird one to win. And that's where, like, if they're going to win a game, that would be if they beat the Bears, then they might F around and beat the Eagles, and then the draft status gets into play again. But I'm not going to predict the Cardinals win, but that would be the one game of the non-Bears games that I'd be like, yeah, I could see a scenario where they did that.
Yeah, and that's the only one, you're right. Like, that's the only one that you feel, right? Confidence, not the right word. And even the Seattle game with, even the Seattle game, you start to be like, not too many questions because of how bad Seattle's played at times this year. And they seem to kind of be close to imploding as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And this, if they can keep pace with the Rams, now they have to, the Seahawks are in a really bad place when it comes to the Rams, because the Rams swept them, and the Seahawks are going to, they only have one division game left, and it's against the Cardinals, and it looks like that's going to be their 2 division wins. And so they need to do some things, and if Geno has to miss any more time, Drew Lock is, he's just not. He's not as good as Geno Smith, and Geno Smith's not even that great. Like, he's respectable. He's definitely not as good as he was at the beginning of last year, but he's way better than Drew Lock with that offense. It's different. So yeah, that's true. But that defense, that's the defense that I look at, and it's like that's a really tough matchup for what the Cardinals are going to try to do.
Yeah, well, try or are only able to do, right?
Correct. Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals talk on the web. Do a little bit more. Drew Petzing putting a word to connect it to Kyler Murray. Is he the guy? That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise of Sierra podcast of our Cardinals talk on the way. We get back to this question. Is Kyler Murray a franchise quarterback? Drew Petzing on Adam Schefter's podcast said it. Now, he didn't, and I will say this, he didn't say it with the conviction of someone, he like, we're rolling, because he's only an offensive coordinator, so he doesn't make organizational decisions. But Petzing in the context that he can say it, did say as much that Kyler Murray is a franchise quarterback. That they see the improvement is like, and he said he is that guy. He is that guy, and you know, you can probably, both of us, those of y'all listen to the show, you can, like, I am definitely in that, like, there is no question to me that Kyler Murray is a franchise quarterback. Will he do everything that he can? Like, we've seen the ceiling. That's the thing. We have seen the ceiling of his play, and that is special. The question is whether he is going to take the next step rather than just being like, once he's comfortable and healthy, rather than just being one of those guys in the 5 to 13 quarterback ranking, if he can bump into that consistently, into that next level. I believe in Kyler Murray. I believe that moving off of Kyler Murray is probably a mistake. But then again, like, there's a lot about his play that you do. Like, I know I probably overlook some of the things that he doesn't do well, but I'm still like, how can you not believe that he's a franchise quarterback? And how can the organization, just a year after paying him, can we stop with the whole Cardinals looking like absolute buffoons?
Well, and that's the whole thing is you look at it this year and you know, I know that these stats aren't massive by any means, right? Like, they're not the be all end all stats, but you look at it this year, like, you know, Jared Goff is 8th in passing touchdowns. Jordan Love is 6th. Baker Mayfield is 11th. Like, remember the guys that just got paid? Jalen Hurts, he's 12th in touchdowns. He's 9th in quarterback rating, right? Like, you look at the quarterback rating, like Justin Herbert is literally just above Justin Fields, and people are ready to move on from Fields and think Herbert's the bee's knees. Trevor Lawrence is 14th. You know, Joe Burrow's 15th. Those guys just got paid massive amounts of money. So when you look at it, you have to understand that, like, or you have to ask yourself this, like, are you, and I get the idea of, like, scared money don't make money. So don't get me wrong. Like, I truly do understand it, but, like, you have to look at it and you go, okay, am I going to get CJ Stroud, or am I going to get, and I won't even pick on Bryce Young, right? But, like, are you going to get Zach Wilson? Are you going to get Kenny Pickett? Are you going to, you know, are those the guys you're going to end up with? And, you know, Mac Jones, right? Like, those are all first round. Yeah, Daniel Jones. Those are all first round quarterbacks. So if you're going to move on, it has to be an upgrade. And you know, I like Drake May more than I like Caleb Williams. I think I've said that even though on our draft podcast, but, like, that's my opinion. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong, just my opinion on the situation. So when I look at it, you know, if you're going to say, like, you know, and you know, you can hem and haw, and you can create whatever stats you want to justify what you want. But, like, what I'm going to look at is I want a guy that's going to be just flat out better. Right. And so, again, I know quarterback rating is not the best statistic, but the two things obviously is I want a guy that's going to play longer, you know, so he's got to be younger. Obviously we're talking about draft picks, so that's fine. The other thing is I want a guy that's going to compete in that top 10 every year. And, like Jess kind of said, like, the whole thing is from 12 to 1 right now, because of how non-Patrick Mahomes like Patrick Mahomes is playing this year. But from 12 to 1 this year is all jumbled up. I mean, Brock Purdy's number 1 in quarterback rating. Dak Prescott's number 2. Tua Tagovailoa is number 3. Kirk Cousins is 4. if I asked you before the season, would you take any of those guys over Kyler? What would your answer have been? Probably no, right?
Like Kirk, no. Maybe
Tua?
like Dak, Tua, you like. Yeah, I don't know. Tua's I don't know. Daxon, I don't know. Brock Purdy's like no, because
Right.
like that's the thing. Like as great as Purdy's been, and that's another. And I'll talk if I can get. I hope I can get Kyle Madsen from Niners Wire to talk about this, just how great Purdy's been. But imagine Kyler Murray in that San Francisco offense, and understand this: taking Kyler's skill set, his arm talent, his athleticism, and the 49ers would literally never lose a game. And they would score 50 points every week against everyone if Kyler Murray were playing quarterback in that system with those weapons, with that offensive line, with those pass catchers, with Christian McCaffrey. That is ungodly good. I can't even imagine. Just like Kyler would be an absolute superstar. He would we'd be talking about Kyler and Patrick Mahomes. I am certain of that.
Well, and you look at it like how many people were ready to run Dak out after last year or the year before, or the year before. Like this is a guy that, he's only been to 2 Pro Bowls in his career. He was the offensive rookie of the year. Sounds vaguely familiar. And Dak hasn't been to a Pro Bowl in 6 seasons. I don't know if you're aware of that. Nope. And so, like, when you look at it and you're going, okay, like, if you're going to move on, like, and that's one of the things the Cowboys have done is like, as everybody said, oh, you got to move on. You got to go find somebody else. You got to go get somebody else. They've kind of gone, okay, but who? Like, where do we get this guy? And that's the question. So, like, if you're sold, and you as in the Cardinals, obviously, or if you're sold on Williams or Drake May or let's throw Jaden Daniels, go Devils, Heisman winner. If you're, if you're
finally have a Heisman Trophy winner,
right? If you're sold on Bo Nix or Michael Penix, okay, whatever. But like, you better for sure be sold. Like, you better be like, oh yeah, this guy is, unquestionably better than Kyler, because
or at least equal, because he's going to be cheap for 4 years,
right? And so, but to that point, that's where I've come in with this. People don't understand the assets, and we've talked about the quarterback tax before. Like, that quarterback tax is then paid in a different way, right? And now all of a sudden that number 2, number 3 pick, whatever it is, you've used that on a quarterback instead
Correct.
of getting a high level asset to put with the quarterback or multiple.
We're back to the 2019 content, right. Nick Bosa or Kyler Murray. Or would you rather have Kyler, or would you have Nick Bosa with Josh Rosen? Obviously, they made the right choice because Josh Rosen has done absolutely nothing in the NFL since then.
And to your point, that was a hard decision and one that they had to make, and they made the right decision. And so you look at it from that perspective, and you go, okay, right choice at the right time. If you move on from Kyler here, we've talked about it. Like, one, if you draft a quarterback, I assume you just have to get rid of Kyler. Like, you can't keep him on the roster. So now you're talking about
you've got a bad team again.
Right. You're a bad team because you can't add any veterans. You've obviously lost that draft pick that you've been hoarding. And so now what do you do and how do you go about it? Those are questions that have to be answered. So we'll see how it goes. But, as of right now, I think he's your franchise like, I would label him, he's your franchise quarterback for 2024. And he's earned the right to prove you wrong, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense, because it doesn't make sense to do anything else. That said, and if you believe in him, and should he, like, it's the thing, would a franchise quarterback do better do better with what he's done, with he's had. When you can argue, like before this year, while last year was a mess, that any of the success that the Cardinals have had is on his shoulders and basically not anybody else's.
Well, and that's the hard part, right? Because people, and this has been a debate for, the ages of time. But it's tough when you look at the fact that it's hard to remove the quarterback from the team wins itself. And so you look at it, Josh Dobbs in his time had a higher completion percentage, higher touchdown percentage, but they were 1-7. The Cardinals are 2-2. And that's 8 versus 4 games. So Kyler's got, obviously time to make that up, and he's on pace for more yards and same amount of, or just a slightly under in touchdowns and less interceptions. But when you look at situations, it's hard to, like you said, extrapolate that his numbers aren't always as high as other quarterbacks. Now, I think the completion percentage right now is a multi-pronged effect. The first one is being, obviously his getting used to the system, and working back from an injury. But the other thing is that game against Pittsburgh, you had obviously torrential downpour. And so the overall statistics from the game, I think from a completion percentage standpoint and yardage were a little, off in that game, just from the whole situation. That being said, he was probably the best quarterback in the game. And I know people will be like, well, that's not saying much. You got Kenny Pickett and Mitchell Trubisky and blah, blah, blah. But, those, again, are like, unless you're going to be like, hey, we're getting Patrick Mahomes, or we're getting Josh Allen, or we're getting, this quarterback. Like, I just don't know how you justify, or you go in with the, hey, we got to move on from him. That's where I'm at. Like, right. I just, like I said, I feel like he's earned the right to fail before you move on.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Coming up next on the Rise Up Sierra podcast, episode of Cardinals Talk on the Web. One last segment, we talk about the team. What do we need to see from the Cardinals in the last 4 games of the year? That's coming up next on Rise Up Red. We're back on the Rise Up Red podcast, episode of Cardinals Talk on the Web. What do we need to see in the final 4 games? We don't necessarily need to see wins, and one measure of thought would say we don't want to see wins. But what do we need to see? And I think that we have to look at number one is Kyler, and we need to see somewhere that ceiling show up. We need a stretch of a game, or there needs to be a game or a part of a game where that ceiling that we saw in 2021 shows up. It doesn't have to be for a full game. It doesn't mean a blowout win. Doesn't mean a comeback win. It means that the Kyler that we saw shows up again, and it's not just the grinded out, like the gritty win against Atlanta, or the methodical, like that. I guess the more gritty there. Kyler looked better in that first game, and then against Pittsburgh, that was an impressive one to me, because it was a grinded out win that he sort of tailored, that 99-yard drive. But I want to see, holy crap, he's back. I want to see that for a stretch of a game, whether it's a quarter, whether it's a half, maybe a full game, maybe show that in that one win that they get, or that their defense is so bad and they get boat raced by the defense can't do anything against San Francisco. But
yeah,
Kyler's,
scores.
Kyler is matching Purdy throw for throw, and it comes down to the end. They just run out of gas, and it's 34-30. Like, I want a game where I look and say, there it is. We saw it again. It wasn't just he looked good. It was, oh my gosh, he's great again.
Yeah, and I think that's a realistic thing to want to see. I think the other thing you want to see is somebody step up consistently in the receiving core.
Frankly, we need Hollywood has to do something if there's a future for him with the team, and maybe there's already an understanding, but you can't go into next year expecting Hollywood to be one of your top, or like a 1 or a 1A, 1B, with how he's played over the last several weeks. We need a big game. We need a big game with Kyler and Hollywood doing it together. Because I think I say Trey McBride, fantastic. We've seen enough some of the younger guys, and I think that's for the kind of the focus the rest of the way is you want to see the young guys really making strides. But my goodness, we need Hollywood to do something.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned Trey. I would like to just see him continue to prove that he's an alpha, because you look at the best teams, and obviously a guy like Mahomes isn't even able to overcome what he's dealing with right now. But you look at it, and they're typically 4 or 5 guys deep, right? Like, they have guys coming from a number of different areas. So that's going to be the big thing for them moving forward. So, Trey's got to show, and I think he has this year, but you obviously want him to finish strong the last 4 games, that he is he's a legitimate Pro Bowl level type of alpha tight end, because then all of a sudden it's like, okay, if you get Hollywood as well, like you said, then all of a sudden it's like, hey, if you get that one guy, if you get one singular guy to be the number one, you've got a couple 2s and 3s in Hollywood and Michael Wilson, hopefully. Obviously, Michael Wilson, we want to see him stay healthy. But
yes,
I think
that's obviously one of the other things we want to see. Michael Wilson, because he looked so good early, be on the field, make plays again.
But I think you and I are also of the opinion right now for the Wilson pick is that while we want to see him playing and play well, we also are at the point where we kind of need to see him or like, I don't want to say it this way because it comes off as bad, but like you almost are at the point where you just are like, hey, if you get anything from him, it's a bonus, because he just doesn't stay healthy enough, right? Like you said, when you pointed it out, like he's never even been healthy in college. And so, health is the big thing for him. And so how do you fight through that? And how do you continue to see more from that? Then on the defensive side of the ball, I think there's a couple of things. You want to continue to effort. You want to see growth. You want to see BJ Ojulari continue to take steps. If he is a really good secondary rusher, or even if he gets to that top rusher status, which is asking a lot, let's be completely honest. You have to look at it and see how that goes. From there,
we haven't seen much from Zaven.
Yeah, and he'll be back next year. It's just depending on where. But you look at Zaven, like, where does he play? Where does he fit in? I think you look at the corners and you want to see one of those guys continue to grow, whether it be Garrett Williams or Keichel Clark. Obviously, if they both play well, that's a bonus. But if you get one of those guys,
yes,
it's huge going into the offseason, because all of a sudden now you're piecing together and you're saying, hey, we've got we've got this guy in BJ Ojulari, we've got this guy, and let's just say Garrett Williams. Like all of a sudden, you're like, hey, we've got some pieces now. We need more. And then I think you just want to see health, right? You want to continue, like Paris Johnson, continue that trend of playing well, being a good ball player, and finish the season strong and healthy. I think that's one of the big things that we're always looking at. But you want to see Kyler obviously finish the season healthy, because then that that becomes a whole nother debate, right? If God forbid anything happens to him again. So these are all situations where these are things you're going to be looking at. But for now, I think the big thing that you're looking at is how does this team continue to feed off of Jonathan Gannon? Does this team respect Gannon? I talked a little bit about it earlier. You've got guys that are teams that are just, kind of, they're done and they're giving up on their coach. And we don't want to see that for the Cardinals. We want to see them continue to play hard, continue to grow, even if that doesn't mean wins. And Jess and I have spelled it out. We think they got one more in them, but even if that doesn't lead to wins, you see the positive and you see the vision, and it's a lot easier to talk about that after the Pittsburgh game than it was after the LA game, right?
Yeah, certainly. All right, with that, we will wrap up this edition of the show, episode 494. We will be back again later this week for our picks, our preview picks and predictions and prop bets, all of that fun stuff for Cardinals 49ers. And I'm almost certain I'll be able to, because Kyle's never told me no, but I hope to get a show later on the week with Kyle Madsen as well. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. This is Rise Up, See Red Podcast. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red Podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.